to the Technocracy News Hour. I'm Patrick Wood. Today we'll be talking with Dr. Timothy Ball, a Canadian geographer and historical climatologist. He's well known for his opposition to the scientific consensus in the global warming controversy. A retired professor, he taught in the Department of Geography at the University of Winnipeg from 1971 to 1976. Welcome, Dr. Timothy Ball, to the Technocracy News Hour. I thank you very much for coming on with us, and we're just going to get right into our discussion on climate change and what that means to the world today, and especially because there is a great meeting coming up in Paris at the end of this month, the end of November, that will be the mother of all climate change summits, so they say. So welcome to the program, Dr. Ball.
Well, thank you for the opportunity and the opportunity to present what people are not hearing. And I think I'd start with that, them posing that question to themselves: why aren't we hearing this information? And I think that in itself is informative.
I think that it is. And everybody kind of has a sense today that the press, especially the media in the United States, I'm sure in Canada it's the same, but we're not really practicing journalism anymore, at least investigative journalism. And it seems to be that there's a distinct narrative that the media has picked up that it will play no matter what evidence is given to it, no matter what really new factual revelations are put out. They just seem to parrot the same old stuff day after day after day.
Yeah, well, of course, this was the concern of the founding fathers. You know, they realized that an independent media was absolutely essential to maintaining the agenda and keeping America on its track. But Jefferson had very short shrift with the media itself. And today, of course, it is now purely political. It's got a political agenda. And what's interesting is that in Britain, you get newspapers, for example, which don't hide their political agenda. For example, if you want the socialist view, you get the Manchester Guardian, or the Guardian as it's now called. If you want the conservative view, you get the Times or the Daily Telegraph. And biases are only a problem if you're not aware of them. The great problem in North America is papers like the New York Times or the Globe and Mail in Canada pretending to represent across the world the spectrum views, when in fact they're coming at it with a very, very biased view. And it's that hypocrisy and deception that is a lot of the problem.
Why do you suppose that that the media consistently presents the alternative side, the false side? Who got to them first that they pick up the narrative that we hear all the time?
Well, I think that there's a couple of answers to that. One is, of course, that just like with most school teachers, they tend to be to the left in their political persuasion, and then in the media, very much the same thing. They see themselves, especially the new young modern journalists, as do-gooders, that they are, that they are going to correct society's ills, and so what they confuse journalism that is strict, as you said, investigative journalism presenting all sides of the issue, with opinion. That became a problem in newspapers a little while ago, and newspapers started to divide. So you'd have the editorial on one side, then you'd have an op-ed on the other side. Mm-hmm. But the other side of it is, of course, that most of these young journalists and even middle-aged people now are products of the whole environmental approach to everything, that we're here to save the planet. That's our job. and environmentalism has become a religion, and it's an indoctrination through the school system. And what we're looking at now are the products of that in the journalism field. The other thing is, of course, that a lot of these people are also both in the news media, but also in bureaucracies, are the product of the 60s. These are the sort of the hippies of the world, that the flower power and ignoring the realities of life and what actually is important. And so it's that combination that is particularly biased within the media in general. And we could limit it. Some people say, well, it's just the mainstream media. But so much of the local media is caught up in it as well, because they simply get their stories off the mainstream media. So they're all from AP and all these various news agencies. And of course, what happens is that if a story gets repeated often enough, it becomes a fact. These are yeah.
Right. And, I want to pick up a little bit on something you said about about climate change having some of the nature of a religious experience. Yep. And I've been tracking this myself, and it's a curious thing that it has a lot of earmarks of a cult.
Yep.
And when I say a cult, I mean it has a position, it has a religion that it adheres to, no matter what evidence is presented to the contrary. And if that was the only thing, it might not be so bad, but these people demand that you believe as they believe. And if you don't believe as they believe, they would like to punish you. Yep. That's exactly what Al Gore said just a couple of months ago. And there's also a movement now. In fact, I think there's a lawsuit that's going to be filed, at least in, I think, New York, against Exxon. Over climate change, hiding data and, whatever. And, there's calls by some scientists to use the U.S. law, the RICO law, to persecute people who are, criticizing the traditional climate change policy. And it has a lot of the marks of a cult.
Totally. And of course, what's interesting about all of this is that those approaches and ideas are the very antithesis of science. Yes. Science, and where you see that, Patrick, is in when global warming began, and people like me were saying, well, yes, there is warming, but it's not caused by humans. So we were marginalized by being called global warming skeptics. And that's one of the things that you can watch for, that you marginalize people that dare to question by giving them a term. So, for example, if you dare to ask about President Obama's academic record at Columbia, you're immediately called a birther, which then says, oh, well, he's one of those birthers. The more general term that's used to marginalize you is, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist, as if conspiracies don't occur. And so global warming skeptic was applied to people that dared to question the official position that humans were causing global warming. The irony of course, is that all scientists must be skeptics. If you're not a skeptic, you're not a scientist. But what they're playing on there is the definition of the word, because skeptic in scientific terms is very different than the use of the word skeptic in general conversation in the public. Because to the public, a skeptic is somebody who's, oh, you're just cynical about everything, you don't believe anything. And so it's completely different terminologies, but it works very well. What also, of course, reflects this pigeonholing of people or marginalizing of people was that when the global warming hypothesis, because that's what it was, a scientific hypothesis, the public term for that would be speculation, when that started to prove to be wrong, and it started to prove to be wrong because they said if CO2 increases, the temperature will increase. Well, starting around 2000, the temperature started to level off, but the CO2 continued to increase. So in other words, one of the major assumptions of the scientific hypothesis was wrong. What good science would do is say, hey, there's something wrong with our science. But they didn't do that. What they did was they moved the goalpost by changing the name. So global warming became climate change. But then they had to create a new epithet, a new marginalizing of the climate change people who dare to question that, and they then became climate change deniers. In other words, they upped the ante because the term denier, with all the Holocaust connotations, marginalized those people even more in the public mind. And so that's what went on. But back to your question about the cult. This all of what we're talking about now is an ongoing part of the evolution of science and the evolution of history. One of the things that is interesting about the whole environmental movement, and by the way, we needed the environmental movement. It makes sense not to soil your own nest. It makes sense to stop doing things that are potentially causing health problems and deaths. Everybody agrees with that. But what happens with this is what they call a paradigm shift. So starting in the 60s, the whole environmental issue came into being. But what happens when a paradigm shift occurs is that people kind of look at it and say, yeah, there's some good ideas there, but they're worried about it because it's change. And people have an inherent fear of change because they know from history that when change occurs, somebody gets hurt, and it might just be them. And so they tend to be conservative and resist change. Not that they disagree with it, but they're just very cautious about it. However, when a new paradigm like this comes into being, there are always a small group of people who see both political and or financial opportunity and gain for them. So there was the extreme environmentalists grabbed this and said, hey, here's a lovely political agenda that we can use to push our own political agenda of controlling people by telling the sky is falling and you better vote for me and you better support me because I can stop the sky falling and save you from all of that. So that's the sense in which it's a cult. But on a larger scale, Patrick, it goes back to, and here's the interesting contradiction, because in the environmental movement, amongst the extreme environmentalists, there's this anti-humanity, that people are the problem. We're the ones that are causing all of this, that the holes in the ozone and the global warming is all due to what humans, those evil humans, are doing. And what's interesting about that is the same people that argue that humanity is the curse, that we've got to reduce the number of people and we've got to stop a lot of the things they're doing, those same people also believe in Darwin and that this is and we're animals like all the others and this is all part of evolutionary development. So there's an absolute philosophical contradiction in what they're saying and what they're doing. They never think about it like that because of course they're blinded by their cult view and their political view. And it's interesting because science cornered itself into this problem because it chose Darwin, and he would have opposed it himself. In fact, even on his deathbed, he said there were a lot of problems with his theory. But Darwin, as a good naturalist, he wasn't a scientist because they didn't use the term at that time, would have challenged what's going on. But they used Darwin to defeat religion, and that is, now I'm not here in defense of religion. All I'm telling you is what's happened historically and in the evolution of where we are today. And by getting rid of religion, you get rid of, in the public's mind, the reason for humans being here and the reason for humans being different than all of the other animals. And of course, that's the great debate that's going on. You see Richard Dawkins and his support of Darwin and evolutionary theory, and